Part 1. The Habsburg Netherlands. In 1477, Charles the Bold died at the Battle of Nancy. He ruled the Duchy of Burgundy, a rich state built by war, marriage, and buying land in what is now eastern France and the Low Countries. He left no sons, so his daughter Mary inherited these lands. Many people doubted her rule because she was a young, inexperienced woman. Strong local factions, such as the Estates General of the Netherlands, forced her to sign the Great Privilege, which protected their rights. At the same time, the French took over Burgundian lands. Mary married Archduke Maximilian of the House of Habsburg to defend her realm. Their son Philip later married Princess Joanna of Castile. Deaths in Joanna's family resulted in Philip and Joanna inheriting the Spanish thrones. After Philip died, their son Charles V went on to rule the Low Countries, Spain, parts of Italy, and the Holy Roman Empire. He ruled a vast empire on which the sun never set. In 1517, a German monk named Martin Luther challenged the Roman Catholic Church and its greed and abuses. He taught that the Bible mattered more than the Pope, and that faith in God alone brought salvation. Many German rulers supported his ideas, called Lutheranism. In the Netherlands, some Protestants went further. These Anabaptists rejected infant baptism and chose adult baptism instead. They avoided participating in governments and formed separate communities. After violent Anabaptists took over the town of Munster in 1534, European rulers started to crack down on the movement. A former Dutch priest, Menno Simons, later urged peace, but his Mennonites still faced persecution. Later, the ideas of a French theologian named John Calvin also spread. Calvin taught a strict, disciplined way of life, in a world where God had already chosen who would be saved, or predestination. His Reformed Protestantism spread out from Geneva into France, Scotland, and the Netherlands starting in the 1560s. Emperor Charles V spent most of his life at war. He fought France, the Ottoman Empire, and the spread of Protestant ideas. He also fought Protestant princes in Germany. Because he faced many enemies at once, he failed to stop Protestantism completely. In 1555, the Peace of Augsburg allowed each prince and the empire to choose the religion of their own land. On October 25, 1555, Charles gave up his throne. He split his empire in two because ruling it as one exhausted him. His son Philip II received Spain, Italy, the Netherlands, and overseas colonies in the Americas and Asia. His brother Ferdinand I received Austria, Bohemia, Hungary, and the title of Holy Roman Emperor. Philip II struggled to rule such a vast empire. He often delayed decisions because he feared making mistakes. Religious unrest, harsh church courts, and constant wars in North Africa and the Mediterranean drained money and caused repeated bankruptcies. Philip II married Queen Mary Tudor of England in 1554. Together, they forced England back to Catholic rule. Mary died without children in 1558, and her Protestant half-sister Elizabeth became queen. Ongoing threats in the Mediterranean pushed Philip to leave the Netherlands and return to Spain. Before he left, Philip placed his half-sister, Margaret of Parma, in charge of the Low Countries. 3 councils and the Bishop Antoine Granvelle advised her, but Philip always had the final say. This system angered local leaders and worried the Dutch, as they kept Spanish troops in the country and continued the harsh treatment of non-Catholics. Philip wanted tighter control over the Low Countries. He chose to reshape church rule to match his lands. Old ecclesiastical borders meant that some foreign bishops ruled over some Spanish land, while only 4 bishops served the whole Netherlands. In 1559, the Pope quietly approved a new plan to create 3 new archbishoprics and 14 bishoprics in the Netherlands. Granvelle became the Archbishop of Mechlin and was later made a cardinal. Top nobles grew angry. William of Orange, the Count of Egmont, and the Count of Horn felt shut out of power. They feared the redistricting would weaken their influence. From 1561 to 1563, they protested and blamed Granvelle for many problems. Spain also faced money troubles, losses at sea, and unrest in France. In 1564, pressure from the nobles pushed Philip to remove Granvelle. Hard times followed. England redirected its wool trade elsewhere, which caused massive job losses in Flemish towns. War in the Baltic blocked grain and supplies. Trade fell, food ran short, and a harsh winter ruined crops. At the same time, refugees introduced Reformed Protestant teachings from France. The Spanish responded with harsh persecution. One relentless inquisitor, Peter Tielemans, tried over 1,000 people, but failed to stop the spread of Protestantism. In the autumn of 1565, hundreds of minor nobles agreed to the Compromise of Nobles. It called for ending the Inquisition and easing harsh religious laws. In April 1566, they forced Margaret of Parma to accept the petition. She later allowed limited Protestant worship, but tensions kept rising. The Compromise of Nobles gave hope to nobles and to Reformed Protestants. Armed congregations began to hold fiery open-air church services. After one sermon near Steenvoorde, a small group broke religious statues and pictures inside the monastery. This act started the Billenstorm, or the Iconoclastic Fury. Churches and convents across the Low Countries were ransacked. Spanish control was falling apart. In spring 1567, Philip sent Fernando Alvarez de Toledo, the Duke of Alba, to Brussels with an army. Alba replaced Margaret of Parma and claimed he would restore order. He first acted friendly. He invited nobles like Egmont and Horn to Brussels, but then arrested them on September 9th. William of Orange, a Catholic, fled the country, and so did many other Protestants. Some hid in the forest or went to sea, where they became beggars, thieves and privateers opposing Spanish rule. Alba set up the Council of Troubles to punish rebels and heretics. The council killed over 1,000 people and took property from about 11,000 more, giving it a nickname, the Council of Blood. William of Orange planned a revolt in response, raising money and troops from Protestants and sea beggars. In May 1568, his brother Louis won a battle at Hellerlee, but lost another brother, Adolf. Alba soon crushed Louis at Gemmingen, before executing Egmont and Horn in June. William led a larger army through Brabant in the autumn, but failed to gain local support and had to retreat. As mentioned before, many thousands of Dutch Protestants fled the country following Alba's arrival. Many moved to neighboring German towns like Emden, while others went to England, especially Norwich. They built their own churches and printed religious books. They formed underground networks that allowed them to share ideas with each other and stay in contact. William worked closely with these exiled groups. Refugees in English and German ports gave money, ships, and sailors to support his sea-beggars. But because the sea-beggars were pirates, their actions upset England and Emden. In March 1572, England forced them to leave its ports. At the same time, Alba tried to raise money through new taxes. He announced 3 taxes: 1% on property owned, 5% on property sales, and 10% on goods sold. People hated all of them, but the 10% tax caused fear and anger. Many felt Alba was trying to gain too much power. Cities like Amsterdam and Brussels resisted the tax. Events soon slipped out of everyone's control. After England expelled the sea-beggars, they searched for a new base. One captain, Willem van Traislong, urged them to strike his hometown, Brielle. On April 1st, 1572, the sea-beggars landed on the island of Borne and took the undefended town, making it their new home. Part 2. Better the Sultan than the Pope. The capture of Brielle in early 1572 occurred during a time when many hardships afflicted the Netherlands. A harsh winter froze rivers, blocked trade, and wrecked harvests, causing families to sell their clothes, furniture, and livelihoods just to live. So, when Brielle was taken over, a wave of anti-Spanish sentiment took over the Low Countries, stronger than ever before. Riots broke out in places like Rotterdam, Vlissingen, and Gouda. By late April, fishermen, sailors, exiles, and supporters from the Netherlands, France, and England joined the uprising. Alba convened the Estates of Holland, but rebel towns used it to strengthen themselves. In July, delegates met in Dordrecht. A spokesman for William asked for 3 things: name William as Philip's legal governor or stadtholder over Holland, Zeeland, and Utrecht, fund the rebel army and navy, and allow freedom of worship for Catholics and Protestants. The estates agreed. They formed a new government under William and set up committees to manage money, laws, and ships. Despite open rebellion growing under his jurisdiction, Alba was more worried about the French. He feared that the French would help William and Louis and gather troops near Mons. A French army tried to reach the city in July, but Spanish forces trapped and destroyed it. Any future possibility of French help for Mons was crushed in the August of 1572, when Catholic French mobs massacred thousands of Protestants across the kingdom. Alba ruled through fear, punishing towns to deter rebellion. In Ardennes, Spanish soldiers tricked people, then killed and robbed them. They harshly punished Mechlin and other towns for the same reason. Haarlem fought hard with help from nearby towns, but Spain took the city after 7 months. Thousands of soldiers and civilians died during the siege, demoralizing the Spanish. Alkmaar, however, chose a different path. In September, the town let William's supporters enter and flood the land around it, hampering a Spanish siege. A rebel fleet then won a major sea battle on the Zuider Zee, which raised Dutch spirits. In 1573, officially converted from Catholicism to Reformed Protestantism, though he still continued to fight for religious peace. Later that year, Alba resigned and was replaced by Louis de Requesens. Requesens wanted a diplomatic approach, but still fought the rebels. In October, the Spanish besieged Leiden. The city starved, disease spread, and many died. William ordered the land flooded to save it. On October 3rd, 1574, almost a year since the siege began, the rebels freed Leiden and soon founded a university there. Spain also struggled. Requesens had no money and received no orders from Philip for months. Spain went bankrupt in 1575, and after Requesens died in 1576, unpaid Spanish troops erupted into the Spanish Fury. They terrorized the countryside and sacked towns in lieu of pay, especially Antwerp. Shocked, the estates of Brabant, Holland, and Zeeland agreed to the Pacification of Ghent, uniting to deal with the destructive mutineers. John of Austria, Philip's half-brother, arrived as a new Spanish governor of the Netherlands, with no money and no control over his mutinous men. The Estates General tried to cooperate. In early 1577, they formed the Union of Brussels. John accepted the Pacification of Ghent in the Edict of 1577, promising to remove Spanish troops. But William rejected the deal. Spain grew stronger when they made peace with the Ottomans. The Turkish fleet stayed in port, and new silver from the Americas filled Philip's treasury. With new money and bank loans, Spain rebuilt its armies and sent them back north. At the same time, Protestant groups pushed for power. In many cities in Flanders and Brabant, they removed Catholic leaders, took control of town governments, and reopened Protestant worship. These actions alarmed many Catholics in the southern Netherlands, where Spanish power was strongest. John of Austria died in October 1578, and a new governor, Alexander Farnese, the future Duke of Parma, took his place. In 1579, nobles in Artois and Hainaut formed the Union of Arras and made peace with Spain. The northern provinces replied with the Union of Utrecht, where each province was allowed to choose its own religion. When Spain placed a reward on William's life, the remaining rebels felt they had no choice but to reject Philip completely. In 1580, the Estates General chose Francis, the Duke of Anjou and Alençon in France, as their monarch because he promised help. On July 26, 1581, they issued the Act of Abjuration and officially deposed Philip as their king. Anjou arrived in 1582. William welcomed him, but many people distrusted France, especially after an attempt was made on William's life. Parma opened the summer 1582 by taking Oudenarde. But then, the long-awaited 10,000 French troops promised by Anjou arrived on the scene. Parma did not need to fear them, because Anjou felt angry about his weak influence compared to William. In January 1583, Anjou tried to seize power at Antwerp. The city's people fought back and drove his troops out before Anjou left for good in June. Parma used this failure to his advantage. He captured towns along the Flemish coast and planned attacks on major cities. William lost some political support because of his pro-French policy, but he still believed foreign help mattered. After Anjou died in June 1584, the Estates General decided to offer sovereignty to his brother, King Henry III of France. Henry III declined the offer before July 10, 1584, when William was assassinated in Delft by Balthasar Gerard. Meanwhile, Parma continued its offensive. After a 6-month siege, Ypres was captured in April 1584, and Bruges surrendered a month later. Ghent surrendered in September, and after a winter, Brussels fell in February 1585. Parma's biggest achievement was capturing Antwerp, which fell in August. In 1585, England and the Dutch signed the Treaty of Nonsuch. England sent soldiers, money, and a Governor-General, Robert Dudley, to the Earl of Leicester. Meanwhile, William's son Maurice of Nassau was made stadtholder at the suggestion of Johann van Oldenbarnevelt, who became the Land's Advocate, Holland's top official. They clashed with Leicester, who struggled with language, politics, and understanding local priorities. He failed in a coup against Maurice of Nassau and left in 1587. On April 12, 1588, the States General transferred Leicester's former duties to those of the Council of State, formally establishing the Dutch Republic. Part 3. Closing the Garden of Holland. By signing the Treaty of Nonsuch, England was now de facto at war with Spain. Elizabeth sent Admiral Francis Drake to attack Spanish ports in the Americas, before singeing the King of Spain's beard in 1587 by burning Spanish ships in Lisbon and Cadiz. Philip wanted revenge, and he built a huge fleet to invade England and restore Catholic rule. On July 21st, 1588, the invincible Spanish Armada set sail from Lisbon toward Calais with about 30,000 men. They planned to meet Parma and his 17,000 soldiers. Together, they would cross the English Channel. Parma would march on London, and the fleet would protect the sea. However, storms slowed the ships, and many leaked or broke. England and the Dutch gathered about 200 ships in response, which sailed faster and carried more guns. For 8 days, English ships stayed upwind. They fired on Spanish ships and pulled away before the enemy could board them. When the Armada reached Calais in August, the English sent fire ships into the harbor, causing panic. A day later, at Gravelines, the English broke the Armada. The Spanish then fled north, where bad weather and poor maps wrecked many ships along the coast of Scotland and Ireland. England and the Dutch had stopped Philip's plan. Even so, Leicester's departure left new disputes. Maurice of Nassau took command in Holland, but Leicester's supporters challenged him. Parma used this chance to retake towns, including Heath in 1589. That same month, an English and Dutch counter-armada attacked Portugal. They failed to install a Portuguese pretender, but they harmed Spanish trade and strengthened their bond. When Maurice took power, he wanted a strong army. They faced the Spanish Army of Flanders. Spain used the infamous tercio, large companies with thousands of pikemen and gunmen. These soldiers stood in big square blocks, with musketeers on the outside and pikemen in the inside. This formation fought well and defended well, but it moved slowly among the wet, broken terrain of the Netherlands. Maurice changed how the Dutch army worked. Soldiers were taught short, simple commands, learning exactly when to move, where to go, and how fast to act. Drummers set the pace of the march, helping the army move as one body. troops regularly practiced shooting at human-sized targets, sometimes competing for prizes. Constant drilling and training made sure that soldiers mastered their weaponry. Much like the infantry, Dutch cavalry turned their commands with trumpets. Cavalrymen and their horses practiced turning, jumping, swimming, and fighting through the loud noises of battle. Maurice discouraged the use of lances and made his horsemen use pistols and guns, allowing them to whittle away at Spanish strength by shooting from a distance instead of charging up close. In battle, drill taught battle formations. Pikemen closed any gaps that enemy cavalry might use, while musketeers followed commands to fire volleys or independently. Cavalry, meanwhile, struck hard against enemy infantry and slowly against other cavalry, running together to stay organized. All of these improvements made the Dutch army a more effective fighting force, and Maurice's innovations would be preserved in manuals that would forever shape other European armies in the future. On August 1st, 1589, King Henry III of France was assassinated as France's religious civil war was nearing its climax. He had no children, so he chose his cousin, King Henry of Navarre, as the next king. Henry of Navarre became King Henry IV. Many French Catholics and Philip opposed him because he was a Reformed Protestant. Henry IV later won major battles against his enemies at Arques and Ivry. These victories forced Spain to send help to French Catholic nobles, pulling troops away from the Low Countries. With Spain distracted, Maurice led an offensive using his new army. In 1590, Dutch soldiers hid in a pea-boat and captured Breda by surprise. After that, they took many towns, including Zutphen, Deventer, Nijmegen, and Hulst. The Dutch then pushed north and captured Steenwijk, Geworden, and Groningen. Each victory reopened trade, hurt Spanish supply lines, and strengthened Dutch borders. Some attacks failed, however. In 1595, Dutch troops briefly took Lier, but local forces fought back and killed many of them. Still, other countries now respected the Republic. In 1596, England, France, and the Dutch formed a triple alliance that recognized Dutch independence. The year after, Dutch and English cavalry won a sharp fight at Turnhout. Meanwhile, Spanish rule in the south weakened. Parma had died in 1592. A string of weak governors followed, and Spanish troops mutinied many times. Nobles complained that Spain ignored local rights and broke earlier promises. Money problems grew so severe that Spain declared bankruptcy again in 1596. Philip wanted the Netherlands to stay in his family. He planned to give them to his daughter Isabella as a wedding gift. After her first fiancé died, he placed her in charge of the Spanish Netherlands, but only if she married her cousin Albert, the governor. Many people disliked Albert because he had ordered the death of an Anabaptist woman, Anna Utenhoven, for her faith. People across the land condemned this act. In 1598, Isabella agreed to marry Albert, and Philip handed the Netherlands to her. They ruled in name, and Spain kept control of the army and forts. If they had no child, Spain would reclaim the land. Philip died later that year in September. His son Philip III now ruled Spain, while Albert and Isabella ruled the southern Netherlands. At the same time, the Dutch Republic planned an attack on Dunkirk. Dunkirk was a safe haven for Spanish privateers, who threatened Dutch trade and army movements. Johann van Oldenbarnevelt pushed for an attack on land. Maurice disapproved, but led it anyways. The army landed in Zeeland, lost the element of surprise, and began traversing hostile land. On July 2nd, 1600, Albert's forces met Maurice near Nieuwpoort. A hard fight followed in the beach dunes. When the Dutch started to give way, Spanish troops chased too eagerly and exposed their flanks. Maurice then struck with cavalry and won a narrow victory, gaining little. Maurice failed to take Nieuwpoort after a siege and withdrew back to safety. Soon after, Dunkirk privateers wrecked many Dutch fishing ships, damaging trade. For the next 4 years, neither side gained much ground. Spain aimed to take Ostend, the last Dutch port in the south, because it blocked their plans to move north. Both sides poured men and money into a siege, beginning in July 1601. English General Francis Vere led Ostend's defense. Sea access allowed the Dutch to send supplies, but disease, overcrowding, and constant attacks killed many. In September 1604, Spanish General Ambrosio Spinola finally captured the ruined city, 3 years after the siege began. Ambrosio Spinola then struck fast from the east. He took Lingen and Oldenzaal in days, and forced the Dutch back behind the IJssel River. In 1606, he attacked again and scared the whole republic, but withdrew before crossing the river. Spinola demonstrated that Spain could still attack. Meanwhile, the Long War was ruining the Dutch economy, as the army grew larger, more forts were built, and trade suffered with the Spanish embargo. England had made peace with Spain in 1604, and had to stop transporting Dutch goods, which cut into Dutch profits. In 1607, Dutch ships destroyed the Spanish fleet at Gibraltar, leading to an armistice. Many merchants and cities, including Maurice, opposed the peace, spreading pamphlets expressing their fear of loss of trade. Oldenbarnevelt supported the truce to save money and help the country recover. In 1609, Spain agreed to the 12 years truce. Many disliked it, but it lifted the embargoes and raised the Republic's status, as Spain and Albert agreed to recognize the Republic as free states for the length of the truce. However, the truce widened the growing rift between Maurice and Oldenbarnevelt. Interlude: The 12 Years Truce. One major bone of contention surrounding the creation of the truce was the Dutch East India Company. Since the 1590s, Dutch merchants wanted to trade highly valued foreign goods like spices, sugar, silk, and dyes. They quickly overtook English and Hanseatic traders in these markets, even reaching Russia via the White Sea. A dream of a worldwide trading empire was already within reach. In 1594, merchants in Amsterdam formed the Company van Veer to trade with Asia. They raised money, built ships, and sailed to the East Indies, modern-day Southeast Asia. Only part of the group returned, and profits were small, but the merchants understood the potential. Dutch spicery exports in Europe grew fast shortly afterwards. By 1601, many Dutch groups competed for Asian trade, which caused chaotic price swings. Merchants asked the government to step in. In 1602, the United East India Company, or the VOC, was created. The VOC had the right to send armies, build forts, make deals with Asian rulers, and run its own officials overseas. The VOC took key islands in the East Indies and built its main base at Batavia, modern-day Jakarta, Indonesia. During the negotiations in 1609, Spain requested that the Dutch stop their trade with Asia. Oldenbarnevelt even promised this would happen, but never committed it to paper. Given all this profit, it is easy to see why Dutch merchants and towns opposed the truce, as they had major investments in the Republic's trading empire. Unfortunately for them, plans to expand into the Atlantic with a West India Company were put on hold until 1621 as part of the truce. The 12 Years' Truce let the Dutch Republic cut its army and navy to save money, now possessing an army of around 30,000 soldiers. The Spanish in the south cut their forces even more, down to 15,000. The Dutch navy also dropped from 80 to just over a dozen warships. The peace mostly stayed intact, but problems appeared fast. In 1609, the Duke of Julich died with no heir. His lands lay near the Dutch border, and many powers cared about who would rule it. Oldenbarnevelt tried to stop a larger war, while King Henry IV of France raised a large army to force a peace, but a Catholic extremist killed him in May 1610. Maurice then sent Dutch troops to help push Imperial forces out of Julich. Most soldiers left soon after, and by the end of 1610, both sides withdrew. Tensions rose again when the rival heirs switched religions. In 1614, Holy Roman Emperor Matthias sent Ambrosius Spinola with a large army. Spinola took nearby towns, but avoided Dutch garrisons to respect the truce. Later that year, the Treaty of Ghent split the land between the rivals. At sea, fighting continued without breaking the truce. The Dutch fought off English pirates and set up patrols from the Channel to Gibraltar. Trade with the Mediterranean grew, but attacks from North African pirates, especially from Algiers, increased. Dutch fleets sailed against them from 1617 to 1620, with mixed success. Even joint missions with Spain failed to bring peace to the region. During the truce, a fierce fight over church teaching shook the Dutch Republic. The debate broke out over a controversial question regarding Reformed Protestantism. What happens after death, and can people influence their own fate? Two professors at Leiden University led the fight. Franciscus Gomarist said God was so powerful that he alone chose who would be saved, and people had no say in this at all. Jacobus Arminius agreed that God was all-powerful, but he said people could refuse God's grace. Gomarist accused Arminius of weakening God and drifting toward Catholic ideas. Arminius rejected this and doubled down. The conflict continued, even after Arminius died in 1609. The debate spread to churches across the country. Most of the believers supported Gomarists and his strict views. A smaller group supported Arminius and favored moderation. The government at first ignored the dispute, but even Oldenbarnevelt could not help but support the Arminians, while Maurice backed the Gomarists. Oldenbarnevelt used power in urban areas to appoint Arminian preachers. The Arminians could not do much, however, as many people disliked Oldenbarnevelt's trade policies and the Truce of Spain. Economic hardship made things worse, as low pay and high prices saw many support the Gomarists. Starting in 1616, protests, riots, and angry pamphlets stoked the fire. By 1617, the situation reached a breaking point. Oldenbarnevelt feared losing control, so he passed a sharp resolution, allowing towns to hire their own soldiers. This move enraged Maurice, who said it attacked faith and national unity. Maurice then toured the provinces, trying to push towns to turn against Oldenbarnevelt. In early 1618, Maurice forcefully removed city leaders who supported the Arminians, starting in Nijmegen. Crowds pushed Arminian leaders out in some towns, and soldiers refused to obey Arminian governments. Maurice called a national church meeting to stop the unrest. When Oldenbarnevelt opposed the plan, Maurice arrested him and his allies in August. With Oldenbarnevelt gone, Maurice gained more power than anyone since his father died. With help from troops, he replaced Arminian officials and demanded new oaths of loyalty across the Republic. Town militias also changed their leaders and symbols to support Maurice and his allies. The National Synod met in Dordrecht late in 1618. After debating church doctrine, the Synod rejected Arminian ideas and ordered all Arminians to accept its rulings, under the threat of banishment. Meanwhile, Oldenbarnevelt was put on trial and executed in May 1619, while his two allies, Gortius and Ogerbates, were imprisoned for life. Elsewhere, a series of warring events broke out in Prague, Bohemia. On May 23, 1618, Protestant rebels threw Catholic officials out of a window in Prague. They later chose Frederick V as their king. His revolt needed foreign help to survive, but other Protestant powers, including his father-in-law, could not or would not assist him. Only the Dutch Republic stepped in. Many Dutch towns feared renewed war with Spain. Some wanted peace, others wanted war for trade. Maurice used this divide to block the idea of a new truce, going on to send money and soldiers to the Bohemian rebels. Even though Dutch troops fought and lost at White Mountain in 1620, Maurice kept up his support, just in time for the 12 years truce to expire on April 9, 1621. Part 4. The War Killed Munster. The new teenage king of Spain, Philip IV, celebrated the end of the truce by commencing economic warfare on the Dutch. Fresh embargoes cut off Dutch trade with Spain, Portugal, and the Mediterranean, depriving the Republic of valuable resources like salt. Dutch fishing and merchant convoys weren't safe at sea because of Spanish privateers. Maurice was forced onto the defensive. In the summer of 1622, a Spanish army crushed the rebel Protestant armies in Germany at Wimpfen and Horst. Spinola was busy besieging Bergen op Zoom, north of Antwerp, so the defeated Protestant commander, Christian of Brunswick, fled to the Dutch to help them. But the Spanish army soon caught him and beat his army at Fleurus in the southern Netherlands. Spinola lifted the siege of Bergen op Zoom in October, only when the Dutch resupplied it by sea. Christian of Brunswick would be defeated for good a year later at Stadtholm, near the Dutch border. By 1624, conditions reached a low point. In August, Spinola marched east from Bergen op Zoom and began to besiege the well-fortified town of Breda. The siege ground on into the winter, where supplies ran low and many soldiers suffered. On April 23, 1625, Maurice died at age 57. His brother Frederick Henry took charge and accepted that Breda could not hold. The town surrendered honorably on June 5th. Although the capture of Breda was a victory, the Spanish had spent too much money to make it worth it. In 1628, Charles, the Duke of Navarre in France, tried to take over the Duchy of Mantua in northern Italy. Spain opposed him because he was French. This led to the War of the Mantuan Succession, a conflict that would drain large amounts of Spanish men, money, and materiel, more than Breda. Spanish taxes doubled after 1621, and borrowing rose fivefold. Even cuts at Philip IV's court could not stop war costs from rising. By 1627, bankruptcy was declared. The Dutch, in contrast, grew stronger. The worsening of the wars in the Empire and in Italy started to draw in French interests. Their powerful French statesman, Cardinal Richelieu, though a Catholic, supported Protestant countries to counteract France's rivals, the Habsburgs. Richelieu gave the Dutch money in the 1624 Treaty of Compiègne, which helped fund a larger army and navy. By 1629, the Dutch commanded 70,000 soldiers, 50,000 militia, and a skilled fleet led by Piet Hein. Piet Hein struck a major blow in 1628. In September, with 31 ships, he captured Spain's treasure fleet near Cuba and seized over 11 million florins. Spain panicked, and treasure ships started to delay sailing and risk storms to avoid Dutch attacks. Using this captured wealth, Frederick Henry raised a huge army. In April 1629, he besieged s-Hertogenbosch. After 5 months of siege and denying Spanish supplies, the city fell in September. Spain now had to start pulling resources away from much of Germany, while Piet Hein died later that year in a battle with Dunkirk. In 1631, plans to attack Dunkirk, Bruges, or Antwerp failed because of delays, supply problems, and lack of French support. Luckily, in September, the Dutch defeated a Spanish fleet at the Slack, taking 4,000 prisoners and sinking 10 ships. The year after, Frederick Henry led a large army down the Meuse River. Venlo fell in June 1632, and Roermond a few days later. The last city, Maastricht, faced heavy cannon fire, ambushes, and supply problems. After blowing a hole in the walls, Maastricht surrendered on August 22nd. These losses hurt Spanish rule in the south. After Isabella died in 1633, Philip IV brought in his brother, the Cardinal Infante Ferdinand, to govern. He had just won a major victory over Swedish and Protestant forces at Nordlingen in 1634, and his victorious army entered the Netherlands that December. The Swedish had been receiving French financial help, and soon the Dutch received more help as well. In 1635, France promised 2.3 million guilders each year if the Dutch did not make a separate peace with Spain. Frederick Henry wanted to attack Antwerp, hoping a two-front war would force Spain to divide its forces. He offered France a plan to partition the Spanish Netherlands, Wallonia to France, the rest to the Dutch. On May 19, 1635, King Louis XIII of France declared war on Spain. French and Dutch troops invaded Brabant, but after taking Tienen, French troops looted the town and destroyed supplies. Nearby Leuven resisted in defiance afterwards, forcing a retreat. With the French reeling, the Cardinal Infante invaded Picardy, burning villages and reaching Corbie, only 80 miles north of Paris. Fortunately, the Spanish invasion was stopped by November 1636. The events of 1635 led to arguments breaking out inside the Dutch government. Frederick Henry wanted to keep the army strong, but other officials wanted peace and cut down the army's size to achieve this. Frederick Henry delayed these cuts because he feared breaking his alliance with France. In 1638, French troops took Brisach on the Rhine River. This move severed Spanish supply routes from Italy, which they used to supply armies in Germany and the Netherlands. Spain now had to send supplies by sea. In 1639, a Dutch fleet intercepted Spanish ships transporting supplies and destroyed about 30 of them in English waters. Spain's defeat at the Battle of the Downs proved that war, especially against the Dutch Republic, was becoming untenable. Soon, bigger problems hit Spain. In 1640, Catalonia rebelled following government abuse, and Portugal broke away. In November 1641, the Cardinal Infante died of smallpox at age 39, leaving a Portuguese noble, Francisco de Melo, in command of the Army of Flanders. In 1642, he defeated French forces at Harnoncourt, then marched into France with 25,000 men and besieged Rocroi, a town on the road to Champagne. On May 19, 1643, the French cavalry chased away their Spanish counterparts before wheeling around and annihilating the veteran infantry. The Battle of Rocroi shattered the legend of Spanish invulnerability and military superiority that they had tried to uphold for the past century. By the time of the Battle of Rocroi, the Dutch had been fighting Spain for over 70 years. Fighting in the Holy Roman Empire had lasted for 20 years. Both sides wanted the war to end. In December 1641, they agreed to peace talks. France and the Dutch met the Habsburgs in Munster, while the Swedes met them in Osnabrück, two neutral towns in Westphalia. Frederick Henry still wanted to win more land, so he tried to keep talks quiet and limit the government's rule. But the rich province of Holland had had enough, and cut army spending and reduced the amount of troops. In 1644, Frederick Henry attacked Matanzas van Ghent, which surrendered and saved his reputation. In 1645, he moved toward Antwerp, but avoided battle because enemy cavalry stood strong. He took Hulst instead. While talks continued, he tried to take Bruges, but suffered a stroke. The French continued capturing towns like Fort Mardyk, Bern, and Dunkirk in 1646. Frederick Henry's forces briefly invested Venlo, but failed when Spanish reinforcements arrived. Spain's economy collapsed again in 1647, in the wake of a revolt in Naples. Philip was at his wit's end, and finally offered peace to the Dutch. A preliminary peace was signed in January 1647. On March 14th, Frederick Henry died at age 63. His young adult son, William II, oversaw the signing of the Treaty of Munster with Spain on January 30th, 1648, later ratified on April 4th. The 30 Years' War in the Empire ended with the Treaty of Osnabrück in October 1648, though France and Spain would continue fighting. An official day of celebration was held in the Republic on June 5th, the 80th anniversary of the executions of the Counts Egmont and Horn. The 80 Years' War between Spain and the Dutch Republic was at an end at last. In the Treaty of Munster, Spain accepted the reality of Dutch independence and let the Republic keep its overseas gains. In return, the Dutch agreed to stop trading with Spanish colonies. Dutch also closed the Scheldt River near Antwerp. This move forced ships trading with Antwerp to pay Dutch tariffs and to follow Dutch rules, preventing Antwerp from becoming the major trade center it once was. Frederick Henry had refused to pass power to his young son, William II, because he doubted his ability to lead during tense times. But that did not stop William II from succeeding his father. Tension grew between the provinces, as Zeeland and Utrecht lost trade after the peace, while Holland stayed rich and powerful. Religious conflict escalated as William enforced strict Protestant rules and expelled Celtic preachers. William used this unrest to gain support. He opposed Holland's plan to cut the army and dreamed of controlling military and political power across the Republic. By 1649, he planned a coup. He turned people against Holland's leaders and secretly moved troops into position to strike. In July 1650, he arrested key figures like Jacob de Witt and threatened Holland's cities. Amsterdam resisted, but Holland as a whole gave in on the question of army funding. William's sudden death from smallpox in November 1650, however, ended his plans abruptly. An uncertain but hopeful future was in store for the Dutch Republic. For Spain, the Peace of Westphalia solidified a decline. Years of bankruptcy and debt caused unrest and revolt in Portugal, Catalonia, and Italy. Naples' revolt ended quietly, as its nobles feared popular rule more than Spanish control, while civil war in France allowed Spain to regain Catalonia. In 1568, France and England beat the Spanish at the Battle of the Dunes. Philip IV ended his war with France by marrying his daughter, Mary Theresa, to King Louis XIV of France. The Treaty of the Pyrenees in 1659 ended the conflict, cementing the end of Spain as Europe's most powerful empire, and heralding the rise of the Kingdom of France as the continent's next premier power.